Hello all. We are going to discuss environmental impact assessment of infrastructure development projects in developing countries. This case study. So, what is environmental impact assessment? Environmental impact assessment is a systematic process to apply current scientific knowledge to check the social and environmental consequences of the project, policies, and programs. So, simply we call this as EIA. It's a device or strategy to mitigate their adverse impacts during the developmental projects. So, it aims to predict the environmental impacts of developmental activities at an early stage during the planning and designing itself. So, EIA is to find ways and means to reduce the adverse impact, shape projects to suit the local environment and present option to the decision makers so that the environmental impact can be assessed and it can be mitigated, protected before the implementation of the project. So, most of the project without the environmental impact assessment, what we do is after implementation we have a lot of adverse effects like building dams in a forest area which made to submerge a huge amount of a forest into the water, and animals and tribal life gets affected. So, during this project an environmental impact study is an important one for the decision makers to shape the project into a successful one. So, internationally the history of EIA started in the United States of America as NEPA, National Environmental Policy Act in 1969. So, after the US initiatives, the world countries organized to implement these environmental impact assessment in their development projects, particularly Australia in 74, Thailand in 75, France in 1976 and 1978, Philippines, India, Israel in 81 and Pakistan in 1983. So, most of the developed countries as effectively implementing this EIA, but particularly the developing countries have some lagging in this area. They have only the minimal effect during these assessments. So, 3 decades back there seems a very negligible policies in framing the EIA in developing countries. Usually the World Bank, the Asian Development Banks and UNEP, United Nations Environmental Programme has developed some guidelines for the EIA in developing countries. So, the enforcement of the EIA guidelines in these countries has been a great challenge and an individual effort by the various departments. These countries have not brought a desired results due to their underdeveloped economy and a lack of literacy in this region. So, the environmental sustainability in the developing countries has not been ensured by EIA. It should be ensured, but it's not been ensured by EIA, and there is a need to develop a strategic environmental assessment as SEA. We call it as SEA, Strategic Environmental Assessment. So, in this study, the problem and issue relating to the EIA and the SEA in the developing countries have to be discussed. To taking particularly a small project in India, but our developing country, we are discussing these kind of impacts, what happened a decade back. A special reference to some project has been identified and suggestion has been given for improve the framework. So, EIA implementation unit is often the subsidiary of project management unit in developing countries. So, the project management has to go with the environmental impact assessment. So, the relatively the low status of these agencies in bureaucracy make it difficult to them to sufficient influence to ensure the effective implementation of EIA process. The effective implementation of EIA has to be done during this. The EIA monitoring and management units they lack the qualified persons and the trained human resources, and they even does not have any strategic plan involving the local communities. There is a shortage of qualified environmental engineers, ecologists, and socio-economists in many parts of the developing country who have been well versed are in analyzing these impact to the society, environment, and the ecology. So, the project managers in during the construction of dams or roadways, railways, whatever it may be, the project managers, they have been often expert in the monitoring and executing of the construction projects. So there is no doubt. But those project managers will not have sufficient knowledge, or they have a little or no knowledge about the environmental monitoring systems and the management or mechanisms. So there is a need to place an EIA as a core subject in all the aspects, even in civil engineering or project management studies, or even in the infrastructure development or IT field, etc. So the EIA is an important part of an environmental studies, so that in future we can analyze the impact or the effects or the consequences of certain projects before implementing those, and we can mitigate or we can alter the things. So EIA process is seen as a bureaucratic requirement nowadays. It need to obtain a project approval in developing countries. So EIA approval is a necessary one to implement the projects. So in this case study, we are taking a particular example of the Sedu Samudram project canal development in the peninsular southern point of the peninsula. For that also, the EIA assessment have been submitted reports, and there are a lot of constraints in implementing the projects. There is also a political interference of which determines the outcomes of several environmental reviews. So there are some questionable practices by public servants. They serve to discredit the process. The treatment of the projects in environment critical areas is less than the satisfactory. So there are a lot of further constraints are there. The public participation is an effective tool of involving those public in EIA process, but practically the public has get affected due to the developmental projects, but the stakeholders or publics are not in a position to participate, or they are being neglected by the bureaucracy. But unfortunately, this process is often neglected in developing countries. So the public involvement is very much important in developing countries, but they are being neglected. So in some countries, government is willing to have any form of public debates, or security of its developmental policies. In most countries, for example, affected groups do not have sufficient resources. Even by India, Narmada Dam construction projects, the affected groups have been protesting for a long, but still the project has been implemented. So the affected groups do not have a sufficient resource to participate in the process. So their favor and their living areas and their economic resources, their livelihood get affected. Still, the environmental impact statement or environmental impact report is a not well standardized one in developing countries such as Asia, Pakistan, Bangladesh, India, and around these countries. So there are a lot of constraints, but the environmental management plan proposed for implementation of recommendation of the EIA reports were usually inadequate. Then there is no sufficient information from the local communities. They are inadequate both in terms of institutional arrangement and also the funding allocations. So there is no a balanced management plans in the environmental impact report from the institutional or the funding allocations or from the public during the implementation of this process. So in this, we take a particular example regarding the Sedu Samudram ship canal. India is a developing country, so in this developing country, how the EIA is being implemented, how it has been in a protocol or proceeds. Um, in Sedu Samudram Ship Canal, which has been developed in 2002, the proposal was from the past 3 decades, but it was optimized to implement during the 2002. This canal has lot of environmental impact studies, and still the proceedings have been stopped by the environmental agencies. So in India, this environmental Sedu Sundaram Ship Canal project is the best example to study our environmental impact assessment. So, what is Sedu Sundaram Ship Canal project? In the peninsular India, below the peninsular India in the Indian Ocean, we have Sri Lanka. So, we don't have any continuous navigable route in the peninsula region, even in our territorial waters, because there is a connection between Indian peninsula and the Sri Lanka, that is Ceylon, through an Adams Bridge at Pamban, where the navigable depth is only 3 meters. So what happens? The navigable depth is only a 3 meter. So a large ship cannot pass us through this Adams Bridge because of the very low depth. So what we have to do is our government plan is to dredge the area and to make it more deepened so that the ships can pass through. But what is the problem here means the Adams Bridge historically that is through the religious sentiments, we feel that it was built by the lords, and the Hindu sentiments have been opposing this. It is one way. Another one is political aspect. Once the Sedu Samudram Canal project has been implemented, the region around the peninsula Tamil Nadu will develop, because the ships, when it is trying to travel from Cochin or Thiruvananthapuram to Chennai, it has to go around Sri Lanka. It has a lot of fuel and time and energy waste. But now, if the project has been implemented, it will be an easy one. Even we can, the ship can travel within a span of 24 hours. So hence, due to this problem, all the ships from the west to east and from Tuticorin post to east have to go around Sri Lanka. They have to cross an additional distance of about 254 to 424 nautical miles. So for this, the Tuticorin Port Trust retained National Environmental Engineering Research Institute (NERI) at Nagpur to conduct an environmental impact assessment study projects to implement these projects. You see the picture, India, and then around the peninsular region, Sri Lanka. The Adams Bridge was there. The ship has to go around Sri Lanka. So what happens? A lot of energy, time, and economical waste. So if the project has been implemented in a short route, the ships can travel at a good environment. So in the Sedu Samudram Environmental Impact Assessment, after the request from the Tuticorin Port Trust, so it started in May 2002. So the NERI, National Environmental Engineering Research Institute Nagpur, is appointed as consultant to carry out the EIA studies. Then after 2 years, June 2004, the application along with the EIA report has been filed with the SPCB, State Pollution Control Board of Tamil Nadu, to obtain no objection certificate for these projects. But in 2004 September and November, the public hearing meeting held by the Tamil Nadu Pollution Control Board and 6 coastal districts along this canal alignment passes through was given a wide opposition. There is an opposition from the public along the coastal districts. So in December 24, 2004, what happens? A writ petition was filed in Madras High Court by Coastal Action Network, CAN, on an environmental NGO. It's an environmental NGO seeking the court direction on the grounds that public hearing were not in compliance as required by the law. Court dismissed the petition as a premature one. In 2005 beginning, the public hearing meeting held by the Tamil Nadu Pollution Control Board at Nagapattinam and Tanjavur districts with a tight security it held, but the results was somewhat failed one. In March 2005, again the Tuticorin Port Trust (TPT) files a petition in Madras High Court initiating the action against the TNPCB for delay in the grant of NOC. So our Tamil Nadu Pollution Control Board was denying the NOC, or delaying the NOC. So against this, the Tuticorin Port has filed a petition. The same March, the project proposal placed before the Ministry of Environment and Forestry expert committee at New Delhi, so without the NOC from the TNPC. So see, without the NOC from Tamil Nadu Pollution Control Board, the project proposal placed before the Ministry of Environment and Forestry expert committee at the New Delhi. So this was a major drawback in our assessment system. So the Prime Minister office later finds the EIA report to be inadequate and calls for the restudies. So in 2005 March end, the environmental clearance given by the MEF without waiting for the NOC from the State Pollution Control Board. So later in 2005 April, after 1 month, the CAN, that's NGO, files another petition in the High Court to say that against this approval from the Ministry of Environment and Forest. The High Court asked the CAN to approach National Environmental Appellate Authority. Upon information from the NEAA, the Appellate Authority has not had a chairman from 2000, directs the central government to appoint a chairman within 30 days. So they appointed a chairman, but the proceedings were forwarding. But in June 2005, the fisherman blocked public hearing proceedings of another project, Tuticorin Inner Port Harbour Development, claims the whole process is an farce. So again, the Prime Minister of India, the Chief Minister of India, state boycotts the inaugural function, citing flawed environmental clearance, but doesn't initiate any action to appeal against the clearance, probably since it does not expect much political gain. So in 2005, the CAN files another petition. So before filing another petition, the fishermen protest against the dredging operations as their nets are damaged and there is no clear mechanism to claim for the compensation. So the project was just started, and the fisherman claims that the netting was damaged, and the fishermen do find no way to claim their compensation. They have been protesting from 2002. So in September, again the petition in the Supreme Court to stay the project. The Supreme Court refuses to stay the projects, but issue notice to the central and state government to file their response and also to appoint a member to from the dysfunctional NEAA. So in 2006, the project has been abandoned by a disinterested media. Fisher flocks continues intermediate protest, fully convinced that the State Pollution Control Board is mainly executing to drive them out of their coastal villages and make way for the private corporate projects. So in this, it's clear that the public has not been properly involved in the environmental impact assessment, since they are being the first person affected due to these projects, particularly the fishermen's. So they are being neglected, and the projects was for the interest of the private corporate projects, the environmental impact assessment was not in a proper way. So what happens? What to be considered? To whom the stakeholders to be considered? The first is Tuticorin Port Trust. The next one is NERI and State Pollution Control Board of Tamil Nadu, and MEF, Ministry of Environmental and Forestry, and local fisher flocks and NGOs who live along the coastal districts were the stakes. So what we need to protect in this particular region. So in this region, the Adams Bridge is there. Historically or religiously, the bridge should be protected, and along the bridges, this region is a huge amount of coral reefs, which we call as the ecological paradise, and this should be protected. And biosphere reserves, this Gulf of Mannar region, that particularly the coral reef region, has been approved by UNESCO as an important biosphere reserves, that is Gulf of Mannar, and a lot of fishing resources are there. The direct of the fishermen, the people living along the coastal regions, has a livelihood based on these fish resources. So, what's the participation problem? The importance of the traditional knowledge base of a local public in improving the models and a tool used for predicting impact is long understood. So, the Millennium Report of 2005 by United Nations points out that the effective management of an ecosystem typically requires place-based knowledge. But the place-based knowledge means the persons who living along the coast for a long period. So that is the information about the specific characters and the history of the ecosystem, which is too rarely incorporated in the decision making, and indeed it is often inappropriately dismissed. So, of course, the main challenge in improving the EIA process in developing countries is the rising of public awareness and increasing of an opportunity is a lagging problem. The participation of public should be important. But the current practice in India of conducting a public hearing after the EIA studies are completed can be considered as a meaningless exercise, because they should be consulted before implementation of a project, and they should be incorporated in all the EIA studies. So, with the concerns with no assurance or mechanism to ensure that they have been considered. So, what happened to the Panchayat Raj? So, the Panchayat Raj or the village community should be consulted before beginning of EIA study, so their valuable input can help the scientists to prepare the better EIA support to ensure their livelihood and ecosystem. The modified environmental clearance project is suggested that, which will be the right step forward towards development to ensure the sustainability of an ecosystem. So, which our conclusion, what we are trying to propose is the project proponent, after that, the site approved or pre-EIA consultation. The pre-EIA consultation should include village panchayat and NGOs and state pollution control board. And the next step, EIA studies, it should incorporate the traditional ecological knowledge of the local community. And the third one, the state pollution control board, also take an idea from the information to the interest and media. And again, the public consultation, they should include village panchayat and enclosure. So our conclusion is, each and every step, the environmental impact assessment process, the local community peoples, NGOs and media should be incorporated to get a proper clearing and implementing the project, which should be sustainable for the development and well-being of the countries. So, thank you. We discuss in the later studies.